Okay, it looks like we are live. I will go ahead and play back this video, and afterwards I'm also going to look at the real photos that's provided by NASA. I'll take notes. I haven't seen this video yet either. I'm not sure if anyone who's going to join it has. And we're going to go over it. Did we even go to Mars? That should be simple, right? Obviously, it should be yes, because we saw videos of it. We saw pictures. News was everywhere, right? It's easy. Obviously, we went to Mars because they told us we went to Mars. We saw photos of us going to Mars. Obviously, they wouldn't lie, right? Well, let's go and see. Okay. So I'm going to share. We'll talk about it afterwards. And so what I'm sharing is it's a restream by Spill the Truth. It's basically a bunch of episodes from Rich Planet TV by Richard Hall. It's called the Mars Rover Hypothesis. So enjoy. It's going to be an hour and a half. If you're still on, we'll talk about it. All right, here we go.
Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Now, in previous shows we have discussed NASA's Apollo moon missions and presented a comprehensive set of evidence suggesting the Apollo crafts did not land on the moon. If you contend that statement, then please watch these two Rich Planet TV shows and see if you still hold that view after you've watched them. Now, in recent months, I've been collaborating with researcher Douglas Gibson, who has been investigating more of NASA's claimed projects, namely the Mars exploration missions. Starting in 1976 and up to the present day, NASA have allegedly landed a series of landers and rovers on the Martian surface, which have allegedly sent back photographs and other data to the Earth. Now, I've been working on a hypothesis with the help of Douglas Gibson, which is now running at 50 pages, and you can download it from this link, and it is entitled A Hypothesis: The Opportunity and Curiosity rovers are situated on Earth. In fact, more specifically, the Mars exploration rovers are not situated on the surface of Mars and never left the Earth. As I say, you can download this 50-page document, this hypothesis, from the link on the screen. How many other TV shows would you get a 50-page hypothesis of evidence to back up what we're talking about? Now, here to discuss the claims in the hypothesis is researcher Andrew Johnson. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Richard.
Okay, now I mentioned the moon there, Andrew, and you're, I would say, convinced as you can be that the Apollo never went to the moon, and we've gone through a lot of that evidence as to why you think that. Where do you stand on these Mars missions, Andrew?
Well, it's very interesting to think about because, you know, I have done talks about the Mars missions as well, as you probably know, and some of the viewers perhaps have had a look around on the websites and stuff. So it kind of, you know, once you've broken through the Apollo barrier, if you want to call it that, and you realise that there's no possible way that they could have done what they did, what they claim to have done on the moon, then, you know, you do have to open up yourself to the idea that perhaps because of similar complications with technology, maybe these rover missions, you know, are not as claimed, certainly not as claimed. Mm-hmm. And kind of, I suppose, you know, you've rightly gone forward with your document mm-hmm. to try and explore where we get to when we look at the evidence and try and study it a bit more deeply with this deeply skeptical mindset that we come to, having found out some of the huge problems with the Apollo record.
So I found the more I looked, the more the official version of the photographs, the official story behind them, started to fall apart.
Right.
And it's been 18 months now, and everywhere I look, it's the same as the Apollo missions. I know most people still believe we went to the moon, but if you look really carefully at any single aspect of the science, it just comes apart.
In the introduction, I set out the reasons why the reader should not just dismiss this hypothesis, because a lot of people will do that. And the reason they'll come up with is they'll say, well, why would they do that? There's no logical reason why they would possibly fake a mission to Mars. Well, let's look at the evidence before we decide why they've done it. Let's look at what happened before we look at why they may have done it.
Always a good method, yes.
Yeah, so investigation before condemnation. And we're going to do some of the investigating today. We'll just start by having a quick look at previous alleged missions to Mars. Now we've got from 1964 up to the present day, we've got a lot of attempted Mars missions, the majority of which actually failed. Yep. Most of these were either flybys or orbiters, and we've got a number of craft which are currently allegedly in orbit around Mars. It's all in this table on the screen there, and we've got a number of craft which have landed on Mars, starting with the Viking mission in 1976. Just tell us a little bit about the Viking mission, Andrew.
Yeah, so the Viking mission arrived at Mars in 1976, consisted of 2 orbiters and 2 landers, and they were landers rather than rovers. So they, once they got onto the surface, they stayed in the same place. Those missions cost $1 billion. So going back to 1976, that's an awful lot of money. And they had colour cameras on them. They had a laboratory, chemical laboratory built into them. So one of the projects was to send an arm out into the soil, dig some soil, pull the soil into or dust, whatever you want to call it, put it back into the probe and drop it down into a sort of chemical analysis laboratory, and they did this labelled release experiment and so forth. So quite sophisticated probes. The missions we were told they were a success. Everything worked. They landed where they were supposed to land, and we got quite a lot of good quality pictures from them. Right. It was that mission which first photographed this alleged face on Mars from orbit, not from the surface. They photographed that from one of the orbiters, and the region became known as Cydonia.
All right, well, we'll come on to some of the photographs which appear to have been tampered with from the Viking mission. Now, they conked out in the early 80s, they lost their power, what have you, and then we've got a gap up until the mid-90s where we have Pathfinder, and you can see the various different sizes of what were called the Rover missions. So these are vehicles which can allegedly move around the surface of Mars, starting, as I say, with Pathfinder in, I think it's 97.
That's right, 97.
Right, okay, so that only lasted for a year or two.
Yeah.
Then we've got another gap to the mid-2000s where we've got Spirit and Opportunity, which were a pair of rovers, which lasted lasted a good number of years. In fact, the Opportunity rover is still allegedly active. Is that correct? Yeah. So we can see on the screen there the Opportunity rover, and then we then had the Phoenix
lander.
That was just a lander.
That's right. That only operated, I think, for about 3 months or something. You've got that on your graph there. So.
And then the most recent one, which is Curiosity, which we're going to look at the Curiosity and the Opportunity rovers, which are allegedly still
sending back pictures from Mars. Allegedly, yes.
And moving around the surface of Mars. Now, I've got a section on the power ratings of the Opportunity rover, and in the document I compare it to a mobility scooter, because the weight of the Opportunity rover is 185 kilos, which is probably 2 largish people. So it's reasonably heavy.
Yes.
So you would imagine, if you were to compare it to, let's say, a mobility scooter, which I think is probably a good comparison.
Yes.
Obviously, things weigh less on Mars. I think it's a factor of 2 2.6 times less on Mars. So okay,
Yes.
it's maybe not 185 kilos equivalent load, but a mobility scooter maybe has a, say, an 80 kilogram person. It's comparable. Now, a mobility scooter typically consumes around about 500 watts of power. Now, the Opportunity Rover is rated at just 100 watts, which is no more than a sewing machine. So, in the other thing which I go into detail in the document is how the batteries are charged with just 2 solar panels, which are delivering just 100 watts only for 4 hours a day, and this system has lasted for 10 years.
Yes.
Just think of your laptop battery, right? Because it's probably comparable, or maybe something slightly larger. It lasts in 10 years of charging and discharging.
The life of the batteries, because the Opportunity Rover is supposed to have been roving around on Mars now for 10 years, powered by one rechargeable battery.
Lithium-ion battery.
Yes, and since when did those last 10 years?
You take those power figures and it does make you scratch your head a little bit. You know, of course they will argue, oh, well, you've got highly optimized electronics and drive systems, and you know, we use very low friction bearings in the motors, you know, it's been specially designed for this project and so forth. But when you do the numbers, you know, you start to, like you say, the 100 watts for 4 hours a day, and then also the solar panels, you know, if they're providing 100 watts of power allegedly for, as you say, 4 hours a day, it doesn't seem very much. And also the thing that came into my mind is these things are on Mars, so the sunlight is going to be what, you know, 20, 30, 40% weaker there. Allegedly the atmosphere is more dust laden, so how much more efficient have those solar panels got to be than they would have to be on Earth?
I mean, here's another interesting fact. The rover's operating temperature is -40 to +40 degrees centigrade. So presumably they've been tested to operate in that range. The average surface temperature of Mars is estimated to be -55 degrees C. That's the average temperatures of Mars. At the equator, which is obviously the hottest point, temperature varies from 20 degrees C maximum to -73 degrees minimum. so the temperature that they're on Mars at, -73, is way below the minimum operating temperature. So,
and that's right. And then you also consider it in terms of, if anybody has ever taken their radio out into cold weather, or a torch, trying to switch it on, you'll find that the battery performance at those sorts of temperatures is very much reduced. And it's, you know, it's literally got to put it in your pocket to get the battery going again with a pocket torch or whatever. Anyone can try that. So how are they getting this power system to work?
So the types of batteries used is a lithium-ion battery. So it's nothing special. It's what you would find in a lot of laptops and mobile phones, and it's lasted over 10 years, being charged and discharged probably every day.
Yeah.
And they're only charging it for 4 hours a day with a 100 watt max, probably, solar panel. So,
and I mean, I've pointed out with the Apollo missions, the Apollo rover that they used, the battery technology on that was operating way out of the specified temperature on the high end, you know, on the moon, you know, and that's in their own documents. So yeah, you've got some serious questions here, certainly.
And you know, if we just go back to the comparison that I've made in the document, imagine putting a mobility scooter on the moon, right, with a couple of solar panels on it. How long is it going to last without plugging it into the mains? I don't buy it.
Right.
All right, let's have a look at the Curiosity rover. Now, this is a different beast altogether. It's much bigger, more sort of the size of a car, much more highly powered, and this is the one that there was big fanfare a few years back when it allegedly landed on Mars, and we're going to look at that in a minute. But it uses a different power system, Andrew. This is using some sort of nuclear isotope power system.
The system, as I understand it, is basically uses some type of thermocouple, doesn't it, where you have the cool temperatures on the outside of the vehicle, and then you have the warmer temperature which is created by the radioactive decay from the isotope, and then you have a thermocouple set up between those 2 points, and that provides a current from the temperature difference. That's my understanding.
So
that works.
Right. I've said here, while it seems plausible that a radioisotope electric generator could provide enough energy to power Curiosity rover, the Opportunity rover seems unfit for purpose by comparison. So let's just talk about the testing of these vehicles, because I've worked in my career as an engineer for the best part of 20 years and been involved in a lot of testing of products. And what I set out in the document is the philosophy that you use when you test products, is in that you have a separate test department and design department, and they're not really supposed to collaborate with each other, because you look at the requirements of the product. The test department will have its own engineers who devise the test procedures and carry out the tests separate from the designers, because there's always a chance that both sets will interpret the requirements incorrectly, and therefore it will pass a test without complying with the requirements. So there's all these things, and the videos that I've seen put out by NASA, there just seem to be one big happy family there. It doesn't seem that they're doing independent type of testing that I could see in their videos.
Well, they appear to show some scientists working hard to develop the rovers, but there's absolutely no documentation, no film footage of any of the development stage, or very little documentation and footage of the development of the rovers, and particularly across the landing stages. The I think it's the Curiosity rover had a very complicated 6-stage landing procedure.
That was, we were discussing this earlier, and it does, I mean, from the videos they put out, it's more like it does look more like a PR exercise, and sort of, patting themselves on the back, rather than some type of rigorous, type of audit test where somebody is actually pinning these people down and checking that the systems meet the user requirements, and that these systems are working as designed.
I would expect a device like a rover to probably have several test specifications, each with hundreds, if not thousands, of tests to test against mandatory requirements. All signed off, but all we've got is a few videos from NASA. We can look at this one that they put out, which was the drop test.
Oh yeah.
So we'll just have a look at this now.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
So big fanfare, but what actually happened in that test? We saw something kind of lowered to the ground. Now, I've worked on systems which lower nuclear weapons into Trident submarines, right? And when we're testing that type of equipment, they're operating within, let's say, certain acceleration parameters and velocities. So you don't know that the thing's passed the test until you've got your test data back. Because what we used to do when I was at Faslane nuclear base, we put a 125-ton bag of water on the end of a crane and we'd drop it and then see if the braking system worked, and the accelerations would be measured, and then you wouldn't know until afterwards it's passed the test. You certainly wouldn't stand there clapping your hands. So it just, I don't buy it,
It's right. I mean, if you watch that video, which I think is the test of this so-called sky crane drop mechanism which was allegedly used in the landing of the Curiosity rover. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's like they've set up this rig, they've dropped something down, and they're looking up, it hasn't broken. Therefore it's passed the test. So that's what it looks like to us. I mean, again, there may be things that we can't actually see, but why can't we see more of those, somebody, going through a list of checkpoints, on a list, or like you say, measuring the acceleration of this component and, the stress on that component, what have you. We don't really see that, certainly not in the video. So again, and I think one of the things we're talking about, Richard, isn't it, is having some type of independent verification of NASA's claims.
Now let's come on to the outside area where they've allegedly used to test some of these rovers, known as the Mars Yard. So we'll just put some photographs up on the screen, and it's not the most impressive test site in the world, is it? I mean, what are your thoughts on it, Andrew?
Well, like you say, I mean, you know, it's one of those things, a bit like the Apollo pictures. When you look at them, they seem plausible. When you look at this, it seems like a plausible test area. But when you were pointing out, for example, that your own experience of going on test sites for some of the projects you've been involved in the past, and I've been on one or two of those sorts of projects as well, probably not to the extent that you have, but yeah, it's true. You would have some more. You'd have more security. You know, you'd have more equipment sort of set up. It doesn't really look that
as you said
impressive.
earlier, you're talking each of these rovers, whether there's the test rover or the actual rover, you're talking multi-millions of pounds each. So there's not even, doesn't even look like there's any security there, so someone could just come in and steal it. So it just doesn't look like a comprehensive environmental testing site to me. Right, well, we've yet to come on to the most damning evidence, by the way. I mean, this is really just background what we're discussing at the moment. A rocket was launched at Cape Canaveral on the 26th of November 2011, and it got to Mars in August 2012. And this was filmed, or the Curiosity team sitting behind their consoles, which I find a little bit intriguing, because you've got all of these operators sitting behind consoles, supposedly looking at different parts of the mission of this craft as it's going towards the surface of Mars. But we know that a signal from Earth to Mars takes at least 3 minutes, so that's 6 minutes to get there and to get back. So if they were to modify any sort of part of the mission, it's a 6-minute feedback loop. So they're not looking at a live image. So I would have thought the vast majority of the program to land the thing, or if not all of it, would have to be completely pre-programmed and automatic. So I asked the question, well, what are all these operators doing?
If there's some buffeting in the atmosphere that this thing is going through, and they need to respond to it, then it's going to be 6 minutes later when this thing's already gone thousands of miles off course and potentially crashed. So they must have done some very good modelling and had a lot of good data as to how that thing was going to come down. I mean, I think when they have the press conference, which we're recommending that people watch that landing press conference. We're going to talk a bit more about that in a minute, but they say, I think within that, they say they landed within about 50 metres or something, or 500 metres of the target area, which is, if you're going all the way to Mars, that's pretty incredible. Right. Are they just good engineers and skillful people, with mechanics and so on? But
there is a video which allegedly shows the craft kind of going down to the Martian surface, and then there's another photograph which they claim to be a Curiosity rover on the end of a parachute. So how would, because people who would say that these missions did land on Mars, they would cite these two pieces of evidence, both the video and the photograph with the parachute out taken by a Mars orbiter.
In some ways, the difference between the Apollo deception and the rover's deception is CGI, which is why the pictures we're seeing now are so much more convincing. JPL themselves, the Jet Propulsion Lab, have actually developed software called Virtual Presence in Space technology, which is cutting edge CGI, beyond anything we've seen in the movies. Isn't anybody wondering why?
There's a conference, and I recommend you watch the whole conference, and this was the 2012 landing briefing, so it's the conference after they've supposedly successfully landed the Curiosity rover on Mars, and one of the main speakers there was this guy Adam Steltzner. So they were being asked questions by the press, and let's just have a look at this little clip of Adam Steltzner, who's one of the lead engineers. I think he supposedly devised the
sky crane,
the method by which the thing is actually landing.
That's right. He was the guy who sort of pushed for the sky crane system to be used. Yeah.
Right. So let's just take a look at this.
Adam, tell us about the landing.
All right, Greg. I can't tell you too much about it. I mean, it looks good. I'm being a little flip. In short, it looked extremely clean. We had We touched down in conditions that were on the more benign side of our nominal expectation. By the way, I want to preface everything. This is preliminary data scooped with the sieve in the cacophony of the control room during the celebration, right? And largely by my good friend Miguel San Martin, who's somewhere out there, I hope. At any rate, very nominal, remarkably good. Our navigation error was on the low side of our expectation.
What? I have to ask you, what kind of file type? Can you tell us about the image file type and compression that was used to send this very important couple of thumbnails back from Mars?
Yes, unfortunately, I absolutely cannot. If Justin Mackey is in the room, or there's a couple other people on the team who'd be able to whip that out quickly, but I couldn't tell you. Sorry.
So the guy, he doesn't even know what format the images are in that have been sent back to the Earth.
There's no evidence of any real science going on there, as far as I can see.
I would expect someone who's the lead engineer on that project to know every single minute detail about the file formats, the software, everything. He should, and it appears to me that he knows nothing.
It is very strange when you listen to what he says, and I think the argument would be made that he wasn't responsible for the imaging technology that was used. He was just responsible for the landing mechanism. Even so, I would expect him to have an interest in the imaging technology, because that's what his lander is being used for, to get the images, for heaven's sake. So you would expect him to be interested more enough to be able to answer that question. In fact, that's a theme in that question and answer session, isn't it? There are several questions which, to me, seem fairly, they should be able to answer them, really, and they can't answer them.
No, which I think sheds light on how this cover-up, if it is a cover-up, and if the hypothesis is true, is operating, because I think Stelzner probably believes that thing went to Mars and landed on Mars. So it's a combination, in my opinion, it's a combination of his ego and him actually fooling himself that that's happened. So he's probably been recruited. They've maybe done a personality profile on people who they are recruiting for these lead positions, and maybe people further down the chain perhaps know that the thing isn't landing on Mars, and the vast majority of them on the team are being duped. That's just my opinion, which you'll see why I think that later on in the program. Yeah,
and I mean, I have to say that when we spoke about this, and I'm still kind of hedging my bets on this one. I'm not saying that the rovers aren't on Mars.
Andrew's on the fence.
I'm definitely on the fence, and I don't mind saying that in this case. But like you say, when you stack these things up that we're looking at, it really gives you pause for thought. And I think the problem is that you think, well, what's happened to all this engineering effort? What's happened? They've spent all this money and everything, and we've got these images which are allegedly from Mars, but what really are they? What are we really seeing, and what have they really done? And that's what's hard to believe, that somehow they could have done all of this as a fake. It's hard to believe that it could have been a whole fake.
Now let's come on to the images. You mentioned the images, and let's come on to them. Just to point out, all of these images that I'm going to show you are from NASA's published websites, and I've got the reference numbers for the images, which will be put on the screen, so you can look them up yourself from NASA's website. Now, the first one we're going to look at is a Curiosity rover image. Image number PIA 16204. We'll put the whole image on the screen there, and you can see I've got a little red square marked at the left hand side of the screen there, because some of the evidence in these images is quite hard to see when you look at the whole landscape. But let's just zoom in to that little area that I've highlighted there, and what do we see on the screen there between these two rocks?
Well, there appears to be a small rodent in the picture.
Right. Well, in my opinion, that's some kind of rodent, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen this picture before, actually, before we had this conversation, and it is very strange that you see that image and you think, well, is that just a chance, you know, line of sight effect that we're seeing, or it really does look, as you say, like some type of lemming? Or
See, I originally found it in a video on YouTube, I think by Monty Williams. He thought it was a prairie dog, but if you look closely, it's not a prairie dog. I came to the conclusion that it was most likely a lemming. That's the closest match. And interestingly enough, one of the places where NASA test or claim to test and develop their rovers is in the Canadian Arctic at a place called Devon Island, a 300-mile long deserted Arctic island with a 23-kilometre meteorite crater in the middle of it, and there are indeed collared lemmings. It even looks like the right subspecies of lemming,
Right.
with a tiny mark on its collar.
it's very, very unusual.
And lemmings have tiny little limbs because they live in such a cold environment. They have tiny little limbs. They can kind of curl up in their own fur. And indeed, in the photo, you can't see any limbs.
Now, one of the rovers was tested. It is known that they've done tests on a place called Devon Island.
Yes.
This is the largest unpopulated island in the world, very, very remote. But one of the creatures which is resident on that island and seen regularly is the Arctic lemming. Yeah, and there's we've got a picture of one on the screen there. So, are we looking at, in the Mars image, a picture of a lemming on Devon Island?
Well, this is the question that we need to present ourselves with, don't we? And I mean, Devon Island is northern Canada, isn't it? So it's in that sort of area, so it is very remote.
Let's have a look at this next image. Again, it's NASA, well, I'll give the reference 0109 MR 0684 022 000E1 NASA image. And just to the right hand side there, if we zoom into that,
well, again, it wasn't me who initially spotted it. It was somebody on YouTube saying that it looks like a backbone, like a line of vertebrae, some kind of marine species, probably.
Clearly, it's some sort of vertebrae. That's not a random rock formation, in my opinion.
I would agree with that, and I've shown that image myself in one or two of the presentations that I've done. Yes.
Pretty difficult to describe that as a random rock formation.
Yeah, exactly.
How would an image of a vertebra work itself into the Mars images? Well, again, perhaps it is somewhere like Devon Island where they've tested some of these rovers. A whale that's been beached, or one theory is that we get what are known as walrus graveyards, where hunters will come and kill a load of walruses and they'll take the tusks and all of the stuff that they want, and then they'll just leave the bodies to rot. So you'll get vertebrae lying around the ground, as we see there. And we see here on the screen a picture of a whale skeleton. So we're not biologists, so we haven't really identified what type of creature the vertebrae is from, but certainly pretty conclusive to me that that's some animal that's died, that's been on Earth.
Right, and I mean, you know, this brings us to the point of there are a number of these images, and we're going to come on to some more. So we have two alternatives, really. Either we're looking at images from Mars, and Mars once had creatures, you know, like whales, like walruses, going around in its oceans or seas or whatever. Or we're looking at images from the Earth, which are purported to be from Mars, and either of those two gives us a problem with the official story of what's going on.
If you look at the lemming, it would say it has to have the life the same as Earth now.
Atmosphere,
How can a lemming exist in the Martian atmosphere with what is it, less than 1%?
Minus 73 degrees centigrade or whatever.
So
there's a few other remarkably bone-like rocks that have turned up in the photographs.
Well, let's turn to that one, because we've got that one next.
The best match I could find was walrus bones.
So Douglas Gibson has actually suggested that this bone on the surface of Mars is actually a walrus arm bone.
But that walrus forearm definitely seems to be the best match.
Right, so you think...
But if anyone knows more about sea mammalian bones.
Yeah, we can,
happy to be corrected.
Yeah, we can see the image there of a walrus skeleton. It does look very similar to some sort of arm bone of a sea creature such as a walrus.
It does, and I mean that particular image I'd not seen before I saw it in your document, the one of this. It does look like a bone, you know, a hip bone or a thigh bone or something, or the walrus equivalent of whatever they would call it on a walrus. Yeah, yeah, very unusual.
If they are faking it, they would have to do it in extremely remote parts of the world. And interestingly, in some of the remotest Arctic regions, what they call the Arctic desert regions of the world, you can find what they call walrus graveyards, because walrus is the early hunters a couple hundred years ago. They didn't even have to go out to sea. They could just find a huddle of walruses, because they crawl up on the land and shoot the whole lot of them and just take the tusks.
So we've got lemmings running around, we've got dead walruses and dead whales, and we've got lumps of wood. And are we really suggesting that all that life is existing on a Martian atmosphere with less than 1% of the Earth's atmosphere and carbon dioxide? It's not an atmosphere that can support life like on Earth. So where are these images really being taken?
It makes you wonder.
All right, we'll come on to the next image, which is, as I said, what appears to be a lump of wood.
That's it.
You were aware of this image, Andrew?
Yes.
Before you've seen the document, yeah.
Yeah, I mean this particular image, I'd used this in several presentations I'd done in 2000, probably 2005, 2004, that sort of time period. Not long after it had come out, I saw it posted on the internet for him, and it looked like a lump of 3x2. You know?
And this has come from the Opportunity rover.
Yeah, and it's in a panorama image that you can find. But again, it's a black and white image. Why aren't they giving us colour? You know, as we were saying earlier on, that's
a plank of wood.
Yeah. Let's see. One of the other places, if they are using very remote places on Earth to fake it, one of the other likely locations would be Svalbard or Spitsbergen.
This is another test site.
Where they've also tested lots of Mars rovers, done lots of development work, and on Spitsbergen there are indeed quite a lot of old railway sleepers that have been washed up, because there's been a lot of mining on Svalbard over the centuries.
All right, so that could be from some sort of railway sleeper, because if you were to hazard, it doesn't look like a fallen tree. It looks like it's been.
It looks like a cut sleeper.
Andrew said a piece of 3x2.
Yeah.
What is the deal with these? Why are we getting so many black and white images? You've got phones in your pocket that take high resolution digital colour images. Why are we not getting these images from Mars?
Yeah. Okay. And another black and white image we have here, which is from the Spirit rover image. Got the reference there, which appears to show lichen.
Yeah.
It just looks like lichen. What else can it be?
Now again, if that was in colour, it'd probably be absolutely conclusive that was lichen. And we've got an image there which is comparing it to lichen on Earth. And lichen is this sort of parasite which grows on other things. Sort
of like a type of fungus, algae type of thing. I mean, the botanists, I'm sure, will pick me up and they'll tell me it's not a fungus and it's not an algae, but it's that type of growth. It's not. It doesn't really have flowering leaves or anything like that. It grows on rocks primarily. You don't really notice it growing in soils and that.
There are some kinds of lichen that actually grow in the little gaps in the rock, which you can see. And then there's a nice round one growing on the surface. I don't know exactly what the different subspecies of lichen are.
And now we come on to images of fossils.
One of the ones that Charles Schultz mentioned, which he says is a crinoid. But far more compelling really is a man called Richard Hoover, who's studied fossils all his life and worked for NASA for 40 years, and he says it is absolutely definitely a crinoid.
So the guy who's working for NASA, is he therefore saying that there's crinoid fossils on Mars, or what's he saying? Or is he saying they're fooling us with images from Earth? Does he make a judgment on that?
No, he doesn't.
Right, you just said it. Okay.
Perhaps he's worried about his pension.
People who are experts on fossils have looked at this image and can conclude that it's a crinoid fossil, and we've just got it next to a crinoid fossil there, and you can see the similarities with these sort of ridges.
Isn't the logical conclusion that the photographs are coming from the Earth rather than Mars, because these are Earth species of fossils? I think the best one was a crinoid.
Yeah, I mean, this is something again I became aware of on Charles Schultz's site, or one similar to this. Might not have been this exact image, but he had some similar images, and I've shown them in some of the talks that I've done with trilobites. And there's one that looks like a fossilized octopus that he had as well. So there's a number of these images that, and he points out, as we were saying earlier, that he'd gone through hundreds or even thousands of these images, and they're just like tiny little portions of the image, that he's picked them out from. They're not like really big, so he's had to spend a lot of time looking for them.
So Charles Schultz has written a book called The Fossil Hunter's Guide to Mars, and he contends that the Martian Service is got a lot of fossils on it. Therefore, there's at one point on the Earth there was microbial or life,
complex
not
life
microbial
as well,
life, but life.
Yes.
And what we're saying in this hypothesis is, well, hang on, if someone showed you one of Charles Schultz's images, which appears to show a trilobite or a crinoid fossil, what would you think it's most likely an image from? Maybe it is taken from Earth.
It's certainly possible.
Okay, now let's look at this next image, which shows a moving rock. So we've got, this is from the Spirit rover, we've got one image which shows a collection of rocks, and then another image taken at a different time from a slightly different angle of the same group of rocks, and we see that there's a rock which has completely disappeared.
Right.
Which we do get sandstorms on Mars, but
well, this is it. I mean, we've already been talking, and we're going to talk probably more about the atmosphere on Mars. And I've already said it's very thin. It's much thinner than on the Earth. So therefore, any winds that are running on Mars, that are blowing on Mars, they're going to be much less kind of force on objects on the ground, because the air
less
is thinner.
than 1% the thickness of the Earth atmosphere.
Right.
So it's not going to be able to blow a rock over.
Not really. So you have a problem with that idea of this just being blown over or whatever it is.
So it's not quite so compelling. The pictures do seem very strange, but you can argue that the apparent movement of the rock is a parallax effect. That one of the rocks is actually standing quite a distance behind the other ones.
Right.
For me, again, it's more interesting because I'm pretty certain they've used CGI to hide something. The rocks themselves look quite bizarre.
All right, now there is another image that I've included in the document, which is an image of the Curiosity rover, and it's a self-portrait. So the question to be asked is, how did the thing take a photograph of itself without seeing the arm of the camera? Now, NASA have come up with an explanation for this one, and that is that there was 55 images stitched together, which made that image, and that would also possibly explain why the rocks in the background appeared different on two different shots.
No, it's just too perfect. No one's quite managed to perfect the process of producing mosaics. NASA claim that they've produced some software to produce a perfect mosaic, and also none of the 55 images, which could only have been taken by the Marley lens, M-A-H-L-I, the Marley lens on the end of the robotic arm. None of those 55 images actually appear anywhere on NASA's own raw image database. And also the NASA claimed that the mosaic was actually put together by an amateur astronomer, which seems to be a clever way of avoiding accountability.
And now we come on to another major area of evidence, Andrew, which is the colours on Mars.
Absolutely.
The first craft or lander was the Viking mission, and I think it was the first photograph that it sent back was image PIA 00563, which showed a blue sky and a very slightly reddish or brown foreground. NASA then said, oh well, we've made a mistake with that image, the sky isn't that colour, this is how it is. So the official images, or the revised images, is seen below there, which is just completely red. So What do you make of that, Andrew?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen many of these images now, and you know, probably talk about one or two more. And that story of the image coming through is told by Richard Hoagland, and he said that when the image first came through on the monitors, it had like this bluish, greyish, or greyish blue, perhaps I would say, sky colour. And then somebody said, "Oh no, that's not right, because the dust is very thick there, you know, and we better recalibrate this image." And they twiddled all the knobs, and lo and behold, the sky went red.
NASA's explanation why they changed that image was that there was suspended dust in the atmosphere. So they're saying that that first image wasn't right because there was suspended dust in the atmosphere, so they've corrected it to the second one.
How would they know? How would they know at that point so early on?
As we'll see, NASA have been changing the colours of their images on Mars.
There's this argument been running for years about whether the sky is really red, because they can take a picture using the blue filter and tell us it was taken using a red filter. So then when we replace the red back into the picture, it looks like the sky's red when it never was.
This is from Spirit. They have actually a colour calibration module which has 4 lobes on it, and those should be blue, orange, green and brown in that image. And that's how you tell whether the image is calibrated correctly. Just tell us about that, Andy.
Yeah, so we see this on a couple of and we saw this with some of the Viking images as well, where you have this colour calibration chart, and you know, you can see that these panels which were blue on Earth have turned red when they're on Mars. Right. Now this is not possible by reflected light. You can't, if you have a blue piece of paper or a blue piece of paint and you shine red coloured light onto it, it's not going to show up red. It's going to become like a muddy grey or something. But in these images, it shows up red. And so what should be muddy grey shows up red. And that to me shows that there's been colour substitution of the blue colour range for a red colour range.
This is fairly well accepted with a lot of researchers, that they are messing with the colours on Mars, and they're deliberately making the sky look red and the ground look more red.
Yes, I mean, we can say that it's Gil Levin. He said this with the analysis he's done. He designed one of the Viking experiments. Holger Isenberg, Goro Adachi. You know, I've looked at this as well. But there's been a number of people that have pointed out these anomalies.
And of course, there's 2 explanations, obvious explanations. The first is that the Martian sky is blue and they're trying to hide that fact and make it look red. Or it could be that the images weren't taken on Mars, they were taken on Earth, and the reason why they made them look red is so that they don't look too much like the Earth.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think a lot of the researchers who've said, hey, look, the Martian sky is blue, I think they could be barking up the wrong tree.
It's possible.
We're placing far too much faith in JPL and NASA, and I think we only need to look at their background to decide whether they're really trustworthy.
Starting with a small rodent identified possibly as an Arctic lemming, a lump of wood possibly from an old railway sleeper, the vertebra of a large sea creature, a bone identified possibly as a walrus arm bone, lichen growing on rocks, a crinoid fossil, and also photographs which prove NASA have falsified the colours in many of their images. The question which arises is, do these anomalies provide evidence that all the images from the Mars rovers are in fact being taken from remote locations on the Earth? Coming up in today's show, we examine more evidence and discuss the possible reasons why this might have been done.
Now let's come on to impossible weather, Andrew. We just need to point out what the Martian atmosphere is like first. It's composed primarily of carbon dioxide, 95.3%, and is 100 times less dense than the Earth. The atmospheric pressure is much lower than on Earth, 600 pascals compared to 101,000 pascals on Earth. Current scientific thinking states that there is no liquid water on Mars, and it can only exist as vapor or ice due to the atmospheric conditions. So just expand on that for us, Andrew. Why can't you have rain or flowing water on Mars?
Yeah, well, if the atmospheric pressure is much lower, then any water that would normally be in a liquid form will immediately, you know, because there's no pressure to make it sort of form into a liquid, it just becomes vapor. So you don't have liquid water, and of course because the temperature is very cold, then you wouldn't get really droplets of vapor or particles of vapor, whatever you want to call them, it would form layers of ice.
It's either ice or vapor, not running water, or droplets and that kind of thing.
Because of the low pressure.
All right, well, let's look at this next image, which appears to show some sort of moisture on the lens of the rover, which it could be dust, but you would say it's not, or we would say it's not dust because it clears up a day or two later.
Right, so I mean, I hadn't seen this image before you brought it to my attention. I think it was Douglas that mentioned it to you. And so what are we looking at? Why is this dust? I mean, we don't really know for sure, but as my understanding, they don't have any way of cleaning the lenses. So if this dust has blown up from the surface and somehow stuck to the lens, it should stay there forever. There's no way to clean it off, or until there's another sufficient gust of wind to blow it all off again, which is that what happened? Well,
there's no windscreen wipers.
There's no windscreen wipers that I'm aware of.
Right. So also in this image, we see, if we look carefully at the soil and we animate the soil over a period of about 7 days, by putting one image next to in a sequence, we can see that clearly the soil looks like it's damp and is moving in a particular direction.
Because that's the real giveaway. You can see there's definitely something soaking away into the sand over the subsequent days. I mean, it's really glaringly obvious, and yet NASA's still claiming there's no water on Mars.
So would you say that shouldn't be able to happen on Mars either, Andrew?
Well, it's not according to what they tell us about the atmosphere.
I think it's just colour changes in the sand as the moisture drains into the sand. I don't think the sand itself is actually moving.
Right.
I mean, one thing we did talk about in email, I think, Richard, is to be more sure of this, we'd need to say, let's just say, for example, we were able to find out where these rovers really were, if they were on the Earth. We would need to try and find out the weather conditions for that place, and then see if we could match those with anything that was shown on the sequence of rover images. That's one thing we haven't looked at, and I'd be interested from anybody that would be able to do that.
Right, and we've got another pair of images there which were obviously taken at different times, slightly different angle, which suggests that perhaps the soil has moved from one to the other.
And this is something that Charles Schultz has he had on his website. I don't know whether it's in his book, that we can clearly see evidence that it looks like there's been some type of water flow which has smoothed over some of the grooves on the ground, the channels that are filled up with silt. It's pretty clear to me that this is what's happened in these images.
Now we come on to the cleaning events, because I think it's the Opportunity rover, its solar panels became dusty, and therefore they weren't getting as much power, and the thing conked out, I believe. Is that correct? At some point?
Yeah, very nearly conked out. I think they even claimed that the memory on the rover was starting to malfunction due to lack of power, and then miraculously the solar panels were suddenly clean again.
Right, so the solar panels were suddenly clean. Now, they've put this down to some kind of sandstorm. Just to tell us about that, Douglas.
Yeah, well, they've given us photographs with dust devils going past in the background, so they're claiming that these dust devils have been periodically cleaning the solar panels. But actually, there's an article in New Scientist saying that all these cleaning events have happened in the middle of the night, which seems unlikely if dust devils is the
dust devil will be more likely to occur during the day, you think?
That's right, but also the Martian atmosphere is something like 1/200th of the density of the Earth's atmosphere.
So any wind is going to be 1/200th times less powerful.
Exactly.
Right. So it's difficult to think how something like that could clean a solar panel that's become covered in dust.
That's right.
And in some of the images, people have alleged that the cleaning has been highly selective, in that some of the hinges, there's a photograph where you showed me of some of the hinges of the rover appear to be sparkling clean with no dust on them, and the solar panels more dust on them.
That's right. There was a very, very interesting article by Ted Twinemeyer saying that some of the solar panels appeared to have been cleaned whilst others hadn't. Also, the hinges on the solar panels appeared to be clean when the solar panels were still dirty, and he even believes there are fingerprints in the dust on the solar panels.
Right, so we can have a look at this image here, which appears to show a finger or a thumbprint on the edge of the solar panel. If we just zoom in on that, and one thing I was going to do is perhaps do some calculations on that, what appears to be a fingerprint, just to see if it's the right size for a fingerprint. It certainly seems unlikely that if a solar panel has got so dirty that it can no longer recharge a battery, that it's starting to malfunction, that suddenly it all comes back to life again.
If you park your car in the street for 6 months, it gets really dirty. Does it ever end up clean again?
Yeah. That's a good analogy.
Well, I suppose the rain might, but then of course there's no rain on Mars. So.
Now, I've included some of the NASA images from Apollo, just to show that there's proof that NASA do fake their images, right, on the moon landings. Yeah, so we're just going to look at a few of them now. So this is evidence of previous faking. That's why I've put this in. A chap called David Percy has taken 4 NASA images, which is NASA image AS17134-20437 to 20443, and he stitched them together because they're different sections of the moon. And then he's taken another set, NASA image AS1714722-494 to 22521, and he stitched those together. So he's got 2 composite images, and he's compared them, and we can see there. Tell us the anomaly that we're looking at.
Yeah, so that image is essentially you have a problem with the parallax, because the backdrop for those 2 sets of images is identical, or it's very nearly identical, and yet in one image we have the lunar module in the foreground, fairly close to the camera, and then in the other it's way over to the right, and we have an astronaut, whichever one it is, I don't know, in the foreground. Yet the backdrop is identical, as if we're, you know, what are the chances of having the camera pointed with exactly the same field of view? And
just to explain the problem with that, Andrew, and that is that the lunar lander that you see there in the foreground lands on the surface of the moon, and then when the astronauts leave, the top part kind of explodes away, and then they get back to Earth.
Yeah, so there's no way for it to move after it's landed.
So the lander can't move on the surface of the moon at all. It has to stay in the same position. We see it in 2 different positions on the same mission. So people have looked at this and have concluded that what you're looking at there is a stage set with a front projection system generating the artificial background on there.
Right.
Probably with the help of Stanley Kubrick.
Something like that, yeah, because he was using that method in 2001: A Space Odyssey around the same time.
The Mars rover missions, or Mars rover deception, in my opinion, it's a continuation in many ways of the Apollo deception. All the evidence suggests that Stanley Kubrick faked a lot of the moon photographs on one of his big sets, and perfected techniques for joining, or as best as possible, joining the foreground with the background to create the illusion of a whole landscape. But of course you can do that now using CGI, so you can film outdoors and put in whatever background you like. Which is exactly what I think they're doing, because obviously they need to disguise whatever skylight, whatever is in the background, which is likely to give away their location. They would need to replace that with something less identifiable.
All right, well, let's come on to another NASA image from the moon mission, which is supposedly a family photograph on the surface of the Earth, and we have featured this one before.
On the surface of the moon. You said you want to say that again, yeah?
Well, it probably is the surface of the Earth.
Freudian slip.
Yeah. Yeah, we showed the famous clip of Andrew Johnson putting his family photograph into the oven along with his dinner.
So here we have a family photograph, and over here we have an oven, and this oven is set to 100 degrees centigrade, and I'm now going to put this photograph in the oven. She's cooking some of my dinner, and then I'm going to watch it through the glass. and that you can see that in very short order trying to get better light, but you'll see it when I open it. This is curling up within seconds. So I think that's a pretty convincing demonstration. And here it is. You can see it there curled up, and that's only at 100 degrees centigrade.
Yeah.
That's right, and I'd like to assure viewers I wasn't on the moon when I did that.
Yeah. So just explain why you put your family photograph in the oven with your dinner.
Yeah, well, this was again one that caught my eye because it's a photograph from NASA on the moon, which you can look at based on the physical properties of materials rather than lighting effects. So the claim is that the photograph is on the surface of the moon. If you look up the official sort of temperature of the surface of the moon, the average temperature is 100 degrees centigrade. In sunlight, it's probably going to be 170, 180 degrees centigrade, something like that.
So, as I said in the last show, it's higher than boiling water on the surface of the moon.
Absolutely. So if you have a piece of photographic paper, an ordinary photographic paper, it does what's called convolution. It convolves, it curls up. So that photograph should be curling up, what we're looking at there, but it's perfectly flat. It's in a plastic bag, which doesn't appear to have been, if you heat a plastic bag with a hairdryer, you'll see it all starts to scrunch up or at least change shape. We're not seeing any of that with that photograph. That is not on the surface of the moon. End of.
All right, and then we've got another image here of a lunar rover, and there's all kinds of problems with the lunar rovers, which we covered in a previous show. The fact that they don't even fit into the lunar module, there's no tracks showing there, various other problems with the technology. For example, the operating temperature range of the batteries is completely out.
Right.
So there's a lot of problems with the lunar rovers.
That's right. Again, that's worthy of a little bit of study for people to look at the problems in those areas. Yeah, definitely.
And that's just a few of the faked NASA moon images. Let's now look at some of these testing sites on Earth. Let's use the terminology that they use at NASA. They call them a Mars analog site. Now I'm just going to read out what a Mars analog site is. It is a location on Earth where some environmental conditions, geologic features, biological attributes, or combinations thereof may approximate in some specific way those thought to be encountered on Mars, either at present or earlier in the planet's history. Studying such sites leads to new insights into the nature and evolution of Mars, the Earth, and life. So what they're saying is they're looking for places on the Earth which are a bit like what Mars might look like.
Yes, and have similar conditions, with a rocky terrain or, cold temperatures, or very dry, and this sort of thing.
Now, one of these sites is a place called Devon Island, which just so happens to be the largest unpopulated island on Earth. So they're choosing extremely remote places. I'm sure they could find somewhere just as with the same weather conditions, which is a lot easier to access.
Nobody has ever lived on Devon Island.
There's no flights to Devon Island?
No, there's no...
What about ships?
Well, you could sail there, I suppose.
Would you need
they've had to make their own tiny landing strip to get supplies in and out.
In the document, I suggest in the hypothesis why they're choosing these remote sites, and that's so that no one can actually come and photograph the landscapes that they're using for the faked Mars rover images.
Right. Because these aren't places where you're going to go out for a Sunday afternoon trip, or even on an expedition, with kayaks or whatever. You wouldn't go to these sorts of places.
Even if you had your own helicopter, you'd be hard pushed to get to some of these places. One of them is, the one on Devon Island is next to the Horton crater, which is a huge ancient crater.
When I first looked at Devon Island on my laptop screen, with Devon Island filling my laptop screen, Horton crater was a great big red spot, about 6 millimeters across, I would have said. Right in the middle of the screen, absolutely unmissable. And yet when I went back a week later to look closer, they'd changed the pictures, so you now can't see Horton crater. If you have the whole of Devon Island on your computer screen, the crater is now completely invisible. I think they swapped a a high altitude summer photograph for a winter photograph when there's a slight covering of snow, so all the red soil and rock thrown up by the impact is no longer visible on Google Earth.
That's also very interesting because it alleged that the Mars rovers, or at least one of them, is in the Gusev crater on Mars.
On Mars.
The Opportunity rover, yes, is supposed to be exploring the edge of a 23-kilometre crater on Mars.
Right.
That's a coincidence, isn't it?
So when I read that in your document, I didn't realise that there was an impact crater on Devon Island, or near where this test station was.
Now, obviously, if you're faking the Mars photographs, you need somewhere extremely dry with no vegetation. And practically the first meteorite crater I looked at was this 23-kilometre crater up on Devon Island in the Canadian Arctic. So I just googled, it's called Horton Crater, and the third link that came up was NASA testing Mars rovers there. Now they would say, oh well, we have to go to the most Mars-like locations to test our rovers, but I'm not convinced. They'd be better off testing them in the Mojave Desert, right next to where the NASA headquarters are.
Mm-hmm.
So of course they would argue that they chose that site specifically because they knew they were going to send it to a cratered area on Mars. That's why they chose that particular site. But
an extremely remote island which they've now surrounded with high-tech listening devices to keep away any unexpected visitors. They've been running, they're called the AMAZE expeditions, AMASE, Arctic Mars Analog Svalbard expeditions, that have been running for about 10 years, I think. And they have been to a few different locations on Svalbard or Spitsbergen. But they usually seem to head towards a place called Bokfjorden, and also Woodfjorden, which are also in what they call this Arctic desert region. It doesn't actually get very much snow at all. It's Woodfjorden in particular looks almost completely dry, certainly on Google Earth.
We've got other sites, one in Utah, which if you look at these photographs of the Mars analogues, as they call them, it does look very much like the photographs that they've been sending back, both on Devon Island and in the Utah one. And if you go on to, because we're going to come on to the Mars Society in a moment.
Oh yeah.
And these Mars analog sites, what they do is they get sort of a cylindrical tin can type building, and they'll install it in the middle of the desert in Utah or up in Devon Island, and it has a few stories in it, and scientists will live there for months on end because it simulates a landed spacecraft that they're living in, right? And scientists actually compete to have a go in it, right? To live in it for sort of months at a time, and they get these awards for so apparently it's very, very prestigious for someone studying universities to get their PhD who live in this tin can for 6 months in the middle of nowhere, and they actually get awards for it. Yeah, great.
Yeah. Whatever floats your boat, I suppose.
It takes all sorts to make a world, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
So tell us, where do you think Curiosity rover actually is in reality?
The Curiosity rover has definitely passed several walrus graveyards, in my opinion, which means it's most likely on Svalbard, or it could also be on Bear Island, which is between Svalbard and Norway. Which also has walrus graveyards and is relatively flat.
What about the lemming image though? Is that, because that's...
Well, they're using CGI to join together various locations. Like I was saying, they can have they have to have one location in the foreground that they can use their robotic arm to microscopically examine, but they can have a completely different part of the world, or even just CGI in the background. Some of the hills look distinctly unreal. The Spirit rover seems to have been done almost entirely on Devon Island, I'd say.
Right.
The
Curiosity, you think, is more likely to be Svalbard? Is that what you're saying?
The Curiosity rover has I think they've used bits of Svalbard and a lot of the Atacama Desert.
Right. So let's assume that the hypothesis is correct. I would imagine the best way to expose this conspiracy is for somebody to find where these landscapes have been filmed and photograph them and compare them, so we can be absolutely sure and absolutely categoric of which landscapes they've used. Would you go along with that, Douglas?
Yeah, absolutely. But what I found out fairly quickly was that, of course, they've been very, very careful to use locations that can't quite be identified. So even if there are any identifiable hills in the background, they'll use CGI to put something really indistinct in the background. In fact, that's the kind of the distinctive feature I've noticed of all the photographs, is the lack of distinctive features in the background.
Right, but perhaps, as we've seen with the fossils, the lemming, the vertebrae, sometimes they do slip through the net. So maybe we can set a challenge, the Rich Planet Find Mars on Earth challenge, to any budding explorers out there who might happen to have their own seafaring vessel or helicopter or light aircraft, who maybe want to try and find where some of these sites are and provide documented evidence. Assuming they are on Earth, Douglas, do you think they're faking it with just a camera, or do you think they've actually got a Mars rover there, the whole thing simulated, and so the images are coming from the rover? Or do you think it's just a guy with a camera and a tripod? They can insert the bit of the rover that's seen.
They're using all the techniques. Sometimes the rover's there, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes they're using CGI to stitch together various components to create a realistic landscape.
Now, when we've been recording these shows all about the Mars rover missions and the fact that they may have been faked, an article appeared in Mail Online and in other mainstream publications entitled "I Saw Men Walking on Mars in 1979. Former NASA employee claims there was a secret manned mission to the Red Planet." So this is somebody who's rang Coast to Coast AM, which is an American radio program, and I think this caller, called Jackie, this call was at least as long ago as 2007. Because it was George Norrie interviewing John Lear, and the last time John Lear was on that radio program was 2007. So they've dragged up this story from over 7 years ago of a woman who claimed to work for NASA and who said that some of the Viking images had people in them. But it seems dubious to me, because this person describes moving images and also says that when the Viking craft was moving around the surface of Mars, well, in fact it wasn't. It was a stationary lander. So I'm very skeptical of this story, Douglas, but mainstream media have put this up strangely when we are putting out this research. One aspect that I particularly objected to in this article, it says conspiracy forums have been set ablaze this week after a lady claiming to be a former NASA employee said she had seen humans on Mars. Well, it is bullshit, because this call took place at least as long ago as 2007. So conspiracy forums have not been set ablaze this week. Some people may have been talking about it on the internet because they put it in Mail Online and in other mainstream publications. Certainly any person who read this article and thought there was at least some truth in it, that would then muddy the waters for this, because this does not mention the theory that the Mars rovers never left the Earth and the photographs are coming back from Earth. What it's saying is, hey, someone at NASA saw a person in one of the Viking images. That means there's a secret space program and people are walking around Mars. So it's not questioning for 1 minute the fact that Viking might not be on Mars, which is why it's disinfo, in my opinion.
The problem, I think, is that the Daily Mail have tried to attach that story to a really bizarre story about nuclear explosions on Mars. So they seem to try to lump her in with with a very bizarre story.
As I said, we'll come on to the Mars Society. Why does NASA need a separate organisation, completely separate, to run these Mars analog sites, where they're doing all of this research for the rovers and testing components and this kind of thing? But this Mars Society, it actually says on the internet that it's not a company, It is a not-for-profit organisation and is funded fully by American organisations, which I would imagine means NASA. So they've created this separate organisation called the Mars Society, which is running all of these Mars analog stations. So why do they need a separate organisation? And it's run by this guy, Dr. Robert Zubrin, founder of the Mars Society.
But yes, the Mars Society does pop up in all the right places to be orchestrating some kind of deception.
You know, we could comment on some of his lectures. Have you seen any of them, Andrew?
I've heard him on Coast to Coast, but I've not seen his lectures, so no, I can't really comment on those.
Right. Well, Zubrin is sort of a proponent of manned Mars missions. So what he's campaigning for is to try and get the funding and the motivation to build rockets that can get to Mars, create some sort of little colony, and then get back safely. And he goes into all of the logistics as to how many spacecraft you'd need, the fact that you need to create artificial gravity on the way to Mars by spinning it round and creating gravity. So, but if you want my view on it, his lectures are just like a pipe dream.
I'm going to talk humans to Mars within a decade, okay? And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think it would have to be done in that kind of time frame if you're going to do it. I'm going to talk at some length as to how I think it could be done. In fact, I'm going to show you 2 different ways it could be done. Humans to Mars within a decade. Okay, is that really possible? NASA's current, timeline is to do it around the year 2047. Mars Direct was actually conceived by a team led by me and another engineer named David Baker at Martin Marietta, which became Lockheed Martin, in 1990. This is the mission sequence chart for the Mars Direct plan. You can launch to Mars every 2 years, and we're going to be launching 2 boosters every 2 years to Mars in order to do this. Well, first of all, any space operation requires an appropriate launch vehicle, and we set ourselves the task of designing one in the Saturn V class out of available technology, shuttle technology. So you have 4 shuttle main engines, a couple of solids, the external tank core, hydrogen oxygen upper stage, and a 10-meter fairing, or 33 feet if you work at Lockheed Martin. And this could lift 120 tons to low Earth orbit. But more importantly, it could use this upper stage to send 47 tons on direct trans-Mars injection, or 59 tons on trans-lunar injection. And that is how we wanted to do the mission. Just lift and throw and let it go. Send the payload to the planet, the same booster that launched it in the first place. That's how we've done every real unmanned planetary mission. That's how we did the real Apollo missions to the moon. No one's ever done a mission to anywhere by lifting things to the space station and waiting for the interplanetary cruiser to return from Saturn and be refitted to load the payload on it and then go back out. No, just lift and throw and let it go. And RV. And what this is a little rocket ship for returning from Mars to Earth in the terminal stage of the mission, but no one's in it when it goes out the first time. Or a crew of 4 for a 6-month voyage from Mars back to Earth, landing site number 3. So this is an actual photograph of the base. What you see here, here's the Earth return vehicle. There's the cabin, the 2 propulsion stages, the intakes for the chemical processing unit, which is built into the landing stage that acts as the takeoff pad for the rest of it. Here's the reactor and the crater in the background, the habitat, upper stage where they live, the upper deck where they live. Lower deck is the garage for the little pressurized rover, a couple of solar panels, uses backup power if you have to turn the reactor off. You also have backup power by running the engine of the rover or the light truck, which may be hard to see, but it's sitting over here. It's an unpressurized vehicle, which is also the backup for this one. And then this thing here is an inflatable greenhouse. This is not a mission critical element. It's an experiment in learning how to grow crops on Mars in Martian soil, Martian sunlight, Martian gravity, Martian water for the benefit of future missions and future bases. Now, after a number of these missions have occurred in different places, you'll know where you want to develop a major base, and you could do that by landing a lot of the HABs in the same place and mating them up. These are second-generation HABs here who landing legs can articulate not only up and down, but also side to side.
Using rocket technology to get manned missions to Mars, I think, is I don't think they would achieve it with rockets. They need something more advanced, and I suspect that the whole ethos of what he's doing masks the secret space program, which we've covered in other
yes.
in other
yes. And I mean, when I read this Mars Society in your document, I was familiar with Zubrin, but I didn't really know. I just thought he was just like some space enthusiast. I did not know that they were directly involved with, you know, managing some of these sites, and that is very peculiar. And the thing that I'd add to that is that, again, what some people don't realise is that a lot of these Mars images have been through a private company before they get to the public. That's Mail in Space Science Systems, MSSS. Why are these images being released through a private company before they're available for public consumption? You know, that's another huge question.
And Zubrin did work for Lockheed Martin, who developed secret aircraft, and I wasn't able to find out what he actually did when he worked for Lockheed Martin. I've picked out a quote from one of Zubrin's lectures where he says, "The idea that we cannot go to Mars until much more advanced propulsion systems that can get us to Mars in 30 days is not a valid argument, and I believe it is disingenuous as well." Now, I find that 30 days quote very interesting, because when I gave my lecture about Ed Fouché's TR-3B, I suggested that they've already got the capability to get to Mars within 4 weeks. It's a very similar time period.
It is, isn't it?
So does Zubrin know something that he's not letting on? Because all of his lectures are based on rocket technology and nothing more advanced than that. So,
I mean, that brings also, I think there's another group called the Planetary Society, which also has, I think, a similar kind of language about space exploration in general. And I know that one of the people that's associated with that is Robert Picardo. So this is something I've got from Carl James, and he's been involved with people at JPL as well, Robert Picardo, and he played the holographic Doctor in Star Trek Voyager. So that's a connection worth looking into, and how that, you know, I think we're sort of just touching on a whole sort of other area, how this perception management it operates, you know, with these things like the Mars Society, the Planetary Society, which seem like these benign, you know, organisations intended to promote interest in the space program, but they don't really. They'll poo-poo any idea that there's secret stuff that you know is there.
Yeah. Do you think this could be masking a secret space program?
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah.
You actually think that physics changes as you get further away from Earth? So
that's right. I don't think they can get anyone beyond the Van Allen radiation belts.
Right. So for all you don't rule out the secret space program,
oh yeah, there may well be. Anti-gravity definitely exists. I've got Victor Schauberger's books somewhere. His work was sequestered by the Nazis right back in the 30s. I think they called it torsion physics, which leads absolutely straight into your work on the TR-3B.
Now, in the final section, I've discussed what the reason might be. So let's say that the hypothesis is true, that they're faking all of these missions to Mars. One would imagine it's to conceal something which perhaps is on Mars, and I've listed what may be there. Evidence of past advanced civilizations, human or otherwise, inhabited man-made bases that have already been set up in secret spacecraft or spaceports, the fact that the planet's makeup might be significantly different to accepted scientific theory, and I think Douglas Gibson is of that mind.
The physics of Mars is probably completely different to Earth, and that's essentially what they're hiding, what they don't want us thinking about.
Right. Do you want to expand on that as to what you think it might be like on Mars?
Well, my background is, like you say, in theosophy, in the theosophical worldview, rather than consciousness evolving as a kind of peripherally around matter. Matter has evolved from consciousness. That sounds like I'll be accused of being unscientific, but actually you can't prove either of those sets of assumptions. It's just as valid to start from the that different standpoint.
Let me share that with you then, Douglas, because I've not delved into a great deal into this thing called consciousness on which planet, and scientists will agree, or some scientists will agree, that in order to observe the universe, observe everything that there is, there must be consciousness, and that consciousness must be detached in some way or different in some way from physical matter or even space. So you have to have consciousness in order to experience the world, and this consciousness element is possibly vastly underplayed or even completely ignored in modern science. But what Douglas is saying is that the consciousness is probably the most important of the two.
Yeah, consciousness itself is more fundamental than matter, in my opinion. The problem kind of goes back to the split between alchemy and science about 500 years ago. So science itself kind of grew out of alchemy. Newton himself started out as an alchemist. What seems to be forgotten along the way is that science itself can still be placed back within a larger alchemical context, if you like, which does indeed say that when you travel certain distances away from the Earth, all our physical constants start to change. The speed of light becomes different, which also ties in with Rupert Sheldrake's talk. Was it earlier this year?
There are other things that people have suggested whereby the non-physical element of humans, our soul, if you want to call it that, somehow resonates with the planet itself, and that by taking your physical body away from the Earth, you're disconnecting it from some kind of field, maybe a morphic field or the akashic field, and that you would lose your marbles if you travel more than, let's say, 1 million miles from the Earth.
Well, exactly. I mean, I try to avoid sort of terms like astral and try to use modern scientific terms, which you can do instead. But just what you were talking about just then in Nexus magazine in August, they had an article about the strange experiences of the Russian cosmonauts, experience exactly the things you've just been talking about, altered states of consciousness once you travel a certain distance from the Earth. So there's a change in your consciousness and in matter itself. So when you get to the Van Allen radiation belts, the radiation you're experiencing isn't it isn't really floating around in space, which is a kind of questionable concept in itself. It's actually radiation coming from the atoms of your own body, your own spaceship. It's the beginnings of this, I suppose I'd have to call it an alchemical change in the atoms of your body, but also in your consciousness as well. It's a change in the relationship between the two, which is very, very interesting. I mean, it's just a huge, it's a whole area of science that we're being very carefully
steered away from.
Exactly, and specifically by NASA.
And if it were true, it would turn everything on its head.
Absolutely.
You're saying that the cover-up in this is something quite profound and fundamental, rather than just the fact that there might be aliens on Mars.
Exactly.
You're saying it's something fundamental about the understanding of everything that is.
Absolutely. It's about the relationship between consciousness and matter, what they used to call alchemy, but which you can look at in absolutely strictly scientific modern ways. There's nothing unscientific or irrational about thinking about consciousness itself.
Right. Okay.
And it changes everything when you do.
What came first, consciousness or matter?
Exactly.
Have we got a situation where the rovers are really on Earth, but the orbiters are really going around Mars, or are the orbiters not going around Mars either? You know, and we're seeing some other images. That's a question I think that would need to be resolved. Or have they somehow managed to set things up such that, you know, we're going to end up arguing about the authenticity of all the images and call all the images into question? Because this is something we've seen that happen with 9/11 imagery as well, which, you know, we haven't got time to go into. But so the overall overarching thing, I think, is to cover up secret technology. That's So these rover programs have now become the equivalent of Apollo, in that a lot of good minds, you know, with highly skilled technical abilities, detailed technical knowledge, they're now soaked up into those sorts of programs, and they're not going to be sort of entertaining the idea of black programs, secret technologies, and this sort of thing. They're all helping unwittingly to keep all of that covered up. That it may just be that the rover program is all part of that perception management operation. That's quite possible.
It may well be that they put the rover on a rocket and then just crash it into the back of the moon, or you know, into the ocean, and then they're all being duped by images that are being sent back by some other covert team.
Right.
It's, I think, unless we have a completely independent citizen-based space program where Tom, Dick and Harry can build their own craft and get it to Mars and then go and film their technology on Mars, I'm not going to believe it. Do you see what I mean? Independent verification.
And I mean, if we look at how difficult that is, I mean, if we take the we talked a little bit about this, of the recent crash of the Virgin spaceship 2 that broke up just after it was released from the plane. I mean, that's a kind of a civilian space program. And
it's, I don't buy what happened there. It's to me, they're trying to put into the public's mind that anything above the Earth's atmosphere is really difficult, folks. There's no way civilians can manage it.
Right.
Whether Branson's in on that or not, I don't know. I've stuck my neck out and said I'm 75% sure. I think Andrew's right on the fence, but you're convinced.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I say, I only intend to spend an hour kind of dismissing the idea and the whole subject. Every time I've looked, it's exactly the same as Apollo. Like I say, you take any aspect and try and get to the bottom of the science behind it, and pretty soon everything's falling apart in your hands.
And once you become convinced, do you feel annoyed about it?
Oh, I did initially, yeah. I mean, you do. The same as with Apollo. This is one of the biggest problems. What's that famous saying? It's difficult to deceive people, but it's even harder to convince them that they have been deceived.
Yeah.
Because then, of course, their pride's involved.
Yeah.
So yes, when you try and broach a subject like this, people start getting angry.
Yeah. All right, but you've got over that.
Yeah. I've got over it.
You start. It comes to the point where you actually start to laugh at it. I did manage to get a photograph of the operators taken from behind their shoulders, and we'll just have a look at what they're looking at on the screen. Remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.
Okay, folks, just give me a second. I'm gonna send the invite so people can come in. We can talk about this. What's going on? Come on. All right, it should be updated now in the Zoom chat, and also you can also click on the live chat in YouTube. We might have more to talk about, but you know, if we kind of get off the subject of Mars, we can do an open topic. Or if Ryan, if you're still on, you can run your show. Hey Ryan, how's it going? Is Ryan contacting me in stupid Facebook chat, talking about backdoor stuff. He says dirty Aussie. Okay, I didn't read your next one.
What, backdoor Aussies? That sounds like the start to a bad movie.
it's a very, very bad porn. Porno.
Yeah, it's much worse than going down under.
I'm pretty sure it's illegal. I'm pretty sure it's illegal to make porn in Australia.
Really?
I'm pretty sure it's illegal.
Wow, I never thought of
Well,
that.
I know there's some rule about women have to have a minimum breast size in Australian porn.
That's
no, there's because there was this thing about, I don't know, 5 years ago where
All right, off topic. We talk about
sorry.
it on your show or open topic.
The thing is that those photos are very convincing.
Of what? That it's faked, or that there's stuff on Mars?
It's faked.
So you think you're in the contention that
you
didn't go to Mars?
No. No.
Is it just based off those photos, or just?
No, I just don't think they went to Mars. I don't think we have the capability.
That's a good point. And what about you, Perseus? What's your thoughts?
As far as the Mars rovers themselves go, I think the bigger question here is that if the photos are real, then they're clearly not addressing the most important parts of the photos.
And
why go to all this trouble to send something there and then get these photos back, have obvious anomalies in the photos, and then refuse to make any kind of official statement about it? Why go to all that trouble? So either it's part of some larger scheme that has nothing to do with what it's actually photos about, and it's part of some control system. And even if they did go, and that's what I can't get. If we have the capability to go, and it's as complicated as they say that it is, and we don't have the capability, then why are they squandering what they have brought back in terms of photos? So either it's easier to go, and literally there was some astronaut dusting off those solar panels they said kept getting covered. And it's the fact that it's a rover and that it isn't a manned mission is the cover up. There's just too many inconsistencies, and the fact that NASA is known to lie and manipulate, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly what my official stance would be, but I definitely know I don't trust the official story, and I'm leaning towards elements of it could be staged.
Yeah. So for me, it's a tough one because there's a lot of possibilities. In my opinion, all right, not actually having gone and faking photos and faking that we went is much cheaper, and it's probably much easier to actually do all that they're saying and have all of it be real. I mean, faking it in a studio is way cheaper than actually having all of the advanced technology that they're saying that they have, and actually going there and have it 100% successful and get all these photos, and then of course all these weird stuff that occurs, then actually having gone there. Now on the other hand, if we saying that we did go, we went to Mars, that we went to the moon, and that we have these technologies. Well, the first thing again with NASA, we went to the moon, and within a 6-year span, JFK, it was 1963, gave his famous speech saying we're gonna have we're going to the moon. That's what we're doing, right? We're gonna show Russia or Soviet Union, hey, that we put our mind to it, we can do it, and within 5 to 6 years we're able to. And then within that 5 to 6 years we land on the moon, and within I think 4 years in that span that where we first landed on the moon and the last time we landed on the moon, 10 for 10 as far as successful missions getting to the moon and back without anyone dying. As far as actually planned moon landings, I think we were 5 for 6 or something like that. I don't remember, because a lot of the missions that we go to the moon wasn't to actually land on the moon. So and then the way that it plays out is, yeah, we don't have the technologies, we don't have the photos, we don't have the videos. They've all been destroyed. I don't think our greatest achievement for humankind is going to be so easily destroyed. So I have a feeling that either we didn't go to the moon and we didn't go to Mars because it was just so easy to fake than to actually do it, and we had motivations to actually fake it. The other aspect is, yes, we went to the moon, we went to the Mars, and there's stuff there that they don't want us to know. And in they, I mean, just like I'm showing you with Bill Cooper in Mystery Babylon, Mystery Schools, the ones in control and they have power and knowledge is power. They don't want people except for them to know what's going on in the world for real. They don't want you to know what's going on outside the world, in the moon, in the Mars, whatever that they find. And it's all in secret, and they make sure, because NASA's part of it, they make sure NASA lies to the public, has a different story while they continue doing finding out the truth, finding out more information, and not providing it to the public. That's my thought.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of secrecy in the American establishment. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, we found something, we better keep quiet, otherwise, you know, the Russians might get it. You know what I mean? There might be something on Mars that's not available on planet Earth. But if they actually say this is what's on it, the Russians might get a hold of it.
True, yeah.
And gain an advantage.
I didn't think of it that way, yeah. Like if you find certain minerals, certain...
Yeah, exactly. Certain minerals that you can't find on Earth because of the extreme temperatures and all that type of stuff that happens on Mars. But even still, I mean, getting through that belt of asteroids and shit like that, I just don't know if they can do it. Or is it the belt on the other side of Mars?
You mean the Van Allen belt, the radiation belt?
No, there's a belt of
the Kuiper belt? Isn't that way further out?
No, he's just talking about the regular asteroid belt.
Oh, regular asteroid.
The regular asteroid belt.
Maybe I need clarification too.
Yeah, I need. What is it?
Here we go. Mike, give me some better pictures. Well,
it's behind Mars.
Yeah, it's behind.
It's behind, so. But I just don't think we've got the technology, to be honest with you. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, it's different sending out a like a satellite / probe thingy that they send out. You know what I mean? It's different. You can just send it out and let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll just go and go and go.
It doesn't have to be very big.
No.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to support life. It doesn't have to land anywhere.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to transmit huge files either.
Exactly.
Either photos or videos. Yeah.
The fact that guy didn't even know the file format they were using. Well, I mean, that's the thing too. He could have known and not said, because then people could figure out how to reverse engineer the images.
Mm-hmm.
They definitely do it in JPEG. They just got a Logitech webcam on there, dude. That's all they've got.
Yeah, they just Velcroed it like I do.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, you could get any photo, any type of that NASA provides, any type of format, and you can edit it. I mean, you can edit almost any type of file format, really. So there's no harm in him stating what type of file format that is being transmitted in. So like people might take it and edit it. The thing is, they can. It's more and more informational. Is like how much data are we able to transmit there and back, and how are we getting all this within that time frame? You know, that would be kind of cool stuff to know. And that woman had a great question that he didn't know. And I don't even know if that's answered, because that's something that we're going to need to know, because if we're going to transmit back and forth between people who travel to Mars, we're going to need to know exactly how much information we can send and receive back and forth to communicate, because things might happen. They might be off course. They might be going too fast. They might be going too slow. They might run out of fuel. They might run out of food. They might run out of water. They might run out of oxygen. Who knows? We might need to send another, we might need to keep in contact with them. And they might be limited in storage capacity too. If weight is a problem, we may not be able to give them, and same thing, they may not be able to use the type of storage. Like, how do we survive the storage from all that radiation? Like, if we put a normal, like, hard disk drive out there, I don't think it's gonna survive very well. If we put a SSD, a solid state drive out there, I don't know how well it's gonna survive with the radiation at all.
Just needs a bit of aluminium foil around it.
Oh yeah, tin and aluminum.
Wait, no, gold aluminium foil. That's the part there.
Yeah.
They're banking on you not having enough money to buy it so that you can test it for yourself, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know gold foil is cheap, but I'm just saying in the sense that, it's some kind of special alloy or something. I have no clue.
Oh yeah, it'll be some special alloy.
Some barrier to entry that makes it so you can't just easily test it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a question, one of their reasons is how they got past the Van Allen belt is, those just sheets of aluminum and gold. It's like, why don't we use that at the dentist? We have x-rays. Why don't we just have sheets of aluminum and maybe...
They use lead?
Yeah, we use those big old thick lead.
Yeah.
I remember specifically watching something where one of NASA's engineers specifically said that they were able to get through the Van Allen radiation belt without shielding because we didn't know it was there at the time.
Oh yeah.
That was his answer.
One of the astronauts, and I'll find that and play it back.
But do you think he just meant that, they were exposed to radiation and it just didn't kill them?
I don't know. Another theory is that they were going so fast that the radiation didn't have time to affect them. That they passed it within, like, say, 5 minutes or so.
No, they didn't get saturated, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, what kind of radiation we're talking about? We're not talking about, like, strontium molecules in their body. We're talking about, like, just electromagnetic radiation, right? We're not talking about, like, some specific kind of, like, degenerative, like, radioactive stuff. It's just electromagnetic radiation. At what point does a concentration of just that become dangerous to a human?
Can I just say, I just want to go off topic for a second. Michael Jackson's dad died. Joe Jackson. Anyway, back to topic.
All right, this might be it. It might be the Apollo 12 astronaut Alan Bean. Let me play it back and see what we think.
You couldn't hear it in the vacuum of space. Any ill effects from the Van Allen radiation belts? No. Now, I'm not sure we went far enough out to encounter the Van Allen radiation belt. Maybe we did.
Beginning at an altitude of 1,000 miles and extending an additional 25,000 miles, lay lethal bands of radiation called the Van Allen radiation belts. Every space mission in history with humans on board, from both the United States and Soviet Union, from the first in 1961 to the present, has been well below this deadly radiation field. Mercury, Gemini, Soyuz, Skylab, the Space Shuttle, all maintained altitudes well below 1,000 miles. All except Apollo.
I don't know the distance to the Van Allen radiation belt, and if we did, it wasn't a problem. If we were going to encounter it, then we would have had to build the spacecraft and the spacesuit to not give humans a problem. You don't just build something and hope it works. You study to see what the threats are, the environment is, and then you say, how thick do I have to make the metal on the spacecraft so that going through this kind of radiation or these kind of meteoroids, it won't get hurt. And so, and we build it that way.
The belts are 1,000 miles to 25,000 miles above the Earth.
Then we went right out through them.
No effects on your cells?
Didn't even know it. I don't think anybody, well, maybe somebody said you went through the radiation belt, but we didn't feel it inside, and we didn't get any, added radiation.
In 1998, the space shuttle flew to an altitude of 350 miles, one of its highest altitudes ever, hundreds of miles below the beginning of a field of radiation that was so severe that the astronauts inside of their shielded spacecraft and inside of their shielded spacesuits saw flashes of light with their eyes shut that they described as shooting stars, due to radiation penetrating first the shuttle's shielding, then their spacesuit shielding, then their skulls, and finally the retinas of their closed eyes. As a result, CNN issued the following report noting NASA's unpredicted surprise. The radiation belt surrounding Earth may be more dangerous for spacewalking astronauts than previously believed. Scientists say the phenomena known as the Van Allen belts can spawn killer electrons when the Earth's magnetic field changes. These electrons that are being studied could have an important effect not only on satellites, which has happened in the past, but could also affect the astronauts by creating large doses of radiation that could influence their health. The electrons can penetrate through various materials, including spacesuits, and can pass through, in fact, the walls of the space station, and can create high charges deep inside of these objects.
No strange occurrences?
Nothing like that.
The space shuttle...
go ahead.
The space shuttle went to 365 miles a few years ago. Because I worked in news. I saw CNN. They said that the radiation belts surrounding Earth are more dangerous than previously believed because the astronauts saw shooting stars with their eyes closed just when they got within 600.
Radiation belt. We saw shooting stars, but they're not shooting stars from with your eyes closed, although they look like it. If you're out in space beyond the Van Allen belt, and probably within the Van Allen belt, and close your eyes, and just pay attention. You don't notice it unless you pay attention. Then all of a sudden you'll see a little flash like a shooting star, except it's like that. There goes one this way. Then one just blossoms. And then not that fast. Maybe you wait 3 minutes or 2 minutes and one goes whoosh. Then you see them whistling by. Not on our mission, by the way, they hadn't been discovered yet. Then you see them whistling by. Not on our mission, by the way, they hadn't been discovered yet. Then you see them whistling by. Not on our mission, by the way, they hadn't been discovered yet. I saw them one day.
Honestly, that just makes me think we're being lied to about the nature of radiation more than I'm doubting the existence of the moon mission at that point. Honestly, there's a recurring trend in a lot of this globalist stuff that is, no, you're trapped here on the Earth. It's a recurring theme I've noticed in a lot of different types of disinformation campaigns. The idea that you're trapped, you're limited to this, deal with it. That's a recurring theme I've seen. The flat Earth does that constantly. A lot of the whole space is a hoax, whether it's flat Earth or not, focuses on this. Oh no, get your mind off of expanding outward. You're staying here. It's very much in a, I don't even know how to put it other than to say that it's almost in like a condescending parental tone.
Yeah, I've actually even heard it from who's the they're like the two space gurus now, the science guys, Bill Nye the Science Guy. Oh, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think there was a like a three-way conversation, menage a trois conversation between Stephen Hawking, or maybe it was just, I forget, one of these people were saying how, was speculating, hey, we should make sure that we can actually colonize other different planets, that way we don't have all our eggs in one basket in case there's a disaster on Earth, etc., etc. And Neil deGrasse Tyson was going, or maybe someone else was saying, you know, if we had that technology to go and colonize different planets, we wouldn't need to, because we'd have that technology to save our current planet. And that might be in that same boat, Perseus, is heck, we shouldn't colonize other planets, because if we had that technology to do that, we should be able to save any problem anything.
Well, no, I mean that's the thing. In my opinion, it's irrational that they would be pushing the narrative of. Okay, maybe it is just me reading into it too much, but I do think I've noticed a pattern in like establishment things that are basically, I want to call them like, I don't know, like mind prisons when it comes to the idea of humanity expanding beyond the Earth. They just don't want to address it. They want to say that it's not feasible, it's not possible. They'll put a million barriers between you and it being something that can take place. And I think just on some level, it just reminds me of the same stuff that the Flat Earth does, which is why I think Flat Earth is a government-controlled psyop. I don't know. I think it's probably branched out, and there's plenty of people who are just using it for their own purposes now too. But it all, to me, just is this focus on, and I think it relates back to the environmental message of, if we knew that if civilization was aware that we had more advanced technology, that we could just up and go to a new planet, they wouldn't be able to sell us on this, oh, we have to give up shit to save the environment message here. I think that space exploration plus their message of environmentalism cancel each other out in a way that kind of like destroys the credibility of the other. So that's why they're so secretive about space.
Yeah, I mean, it's like taking that lie to that where, you just have to keep a bigger lie going in order to protect your initial lie, and it keeps snowballing.
Yeah, something along that area.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the stuff that they declassified from the EPA or the environmental administration they have there in the US when Trump took over. His new person declassified a bunch of stuff, and they were like, no, we've known for years sunspot activity drives earthquakes. We can predict when and where earthquakes will happen 3 days in advance with 100% accuracy now. And there have been people on the internet saying that for decades, but oh, that's a conspiracy theory. You can't predict earthquakes 3 days in advance. But it's like, no, apparently that technology exists. Sunspot activity directly corresponds to whatever that's driving earthquake activity on Earth. Maybe it's not driving it, but there's something happening with the electromagnetic core of the Earth and the mantle and the sun's electromagnetic field. Same with the grand solar cycles. Whenever they talk about weather, they never talk about which solar cycle we're in, even though that drives the weather. But it's because it doesn't match up with their human-centric, climate change-driven model that they're trying to push on everyone. Because they need to be able to blame you for why the environment is failing, so you're willing to give things up because of it.
Yep. I think that can be true. And then if they ever reveal that they've been lying all this time, yeah, that could probably make a revolution happen.
Well, yeah, it's just like, what do you think caused the destruction of the Aztec civilization? It just seems like they all packed up and left one day. Like they found that one city of 1.8 million people literally abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe people just stopped believing in the religion that was holding their society together, said, we don't want to practice human sacrifice anymore. Fuck you guys.
Yeah.
And they just kind of fell apart.
That's more likely the cause, in my opinion. It's like, how long these child sacrifices aren't really working. I think we should put a stop to it. And the other guys, we're going to take your kid next. Like, over my dead body. And then another tribe comes in. It's like, yeah, you ain't taking our kids. Civilization over, because you got the masses going against the few elites, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the way it goes. And
the same thing happened in Canaan when they stopped the Baal worship with all the was it Moloch was the one that they were doing the child sacrifices for there?
I don't know enough of that history to know. Moloch sounds familiar, but
yeah, Moloch is like one of the Canaanite gods, and oftentimes a lot of Christian conspiracy theorists associate him with the American elite.
Like Moloch and Baal, maybe.
No, a Baal is the same way that the word Satan doesn't mean what people think that it does. A Baal is a type of god, not a god.
Okay, B-A-apostrophe-A-L is what we're talking
yes.
about.
Anyone who's saying that Baal is a character doesn't understand the language they're reading.
Okay.
A Baal is a type of, I guess you would call it a familial god, The idea that it's a god that is specifically the guardian of a place.
Like an incarnation?
No, so the idea that, so not God in the like large deistic sense, God as in just in the same way.
Like it's a deity, but not the supreme deity.
And the idea is that it only has power over a certain place. So if you were to build a city wall and dedicate it to a specific ball, that ball would only have power within that city.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, okay.
So it's like a ball would be the guardian of a certain city, and each city would have its own ball that suits its character.
It's kind of like an incarnation in a way. Like, say...
what do you mean by incarnation? I might be thinking of a different thing when you say that.
Like, say there's incarnation, like Chronos for time. There's like the Satan for hell. There might be a incarnation of death for someone who dies. They control that aspect of that area.
Oh no, that's like okay. So so it's a portfolio is the word you're looking for, but no, it's different from that.
Okay.
So a ball would have a portfolio distinctive to the place it's been created to protect. It's not. It's a god that's not an entity that exists in nature outside of mankind. It's a creation of mankind. It's an investment of those people's spiritual energy into a protective entity. To basically, it's kind of like paying a lobbyist to go into the spirit world for you.
Oh, wait. So it's a humankind created god based off of their belief system is what it is.
That then basically represents their interests spiritually within the confines of what the ball was created for. Okay. So it's like a super PAC for spiritual energy.
Interesting. I never heard of it that way, but that's pretty incredible.
Basically, any source that was written after the King James Demonomicon turns every type of non-Christian.
I like how you call it Demonomicon. I like how you call it Demonomicon. Can you give people a context why the King James Bible itself is such a... I don't know how you would put it.
Most of what people associate with Christianity in popular culture was not part of the religion until King James decided to revise it. Most of what people consider to be Christian in popular culture was invented very recently in history by him. And you can find there are plenty of older versions of the Bible from before him that look nothing like what modern versions look like.
Yep.
Whether it's the format, whether it's the morals of the stories, whether some of it's simple. One of the things that he did was he changed a lot of the animals to be animals that were real animals in the Middle East that nobody in medieval Europe knew what the hell they were, so that he changed certain things to make it more relatable. So changing pomegranates into apples and things like that. So that's an understandable change. But he goes overboard. He introduced the concept of hell to Christianity. It had not previously existed before him. There was Gehenna, which was like a physical place, physically in Jerusalem, that if you were like buried without honors, your corpse would be thrown and set on fire there, because that's what they would do. They'd burn it like trash. And the whole metaphor for hell comes out of this Jewish cultural reference that Europeans didn't understand.
I just like how you term it Demonomicon. I never heard of it.
Oh no, he also wrote a book called The Demonomicon.
Oh, he did?
Yes.
Oh, I never see things I would never know unless people came on. I'm going to look that up. Now, how is that different than the there's another Omicon. I forget what it is.
Well, I mean, there's a Necronomicon. That's what is it called? That's like a horrible Greek translation of something that was Egyptian or something.
Something like that. I mean, I only heard it from like one of those dead type movies. The third one. Hold on. There you go. Damn it! First thing that comes up is D&D.
Yeah, see, that's part of the problem with searching for these words is that they've been reused so many times by different things in fantasy.
Yeah. And it was King James that wrote it? I mean...
Oh, maybe I'm thinking of a different... No, I'm pretty sure he wrote the Demonomicon.
I mean, this is what I'm seeing. Look, first results. Demonomicon, King James. It's like
yeah, and all this D&D crap is coming up. Not there's anything wrong with D&D. I like it and all, but...
Yeah, it's fun.
Here, I'm just going to see if I can bring something up here. I could have sworn, I think Styx even has a copy of it for sale on Amazon. So I'm just going to check there real quick.
What are your thoughts about Styx?
I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff politically, but I think overall he's a pretty good guy.
What about...
I mean, he has a really good work ethic. I wish I could write like he writes. He's a machine when it comes to that.
What about his beliefs? Are you in line more towards his beliefs, or...
Well, as far as the whole left-hand path thing goes, I think I do kind of agree with him on that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in organized religions because you're just inviting corruption the minute you start assigning positions to people.
Now, the left-hand path, as far as...
Well, yeah, let me put it this way. So the right-hand path is the idea that you're a part of something greater than yourself and that it is your duty to basically supplicate yourself to that. The idea that your path to divinity is becoming part of something that is already divine, that is greater than you, whereas the left-hand path is pursuing your divinity born out of yourself. You're not becoming a part of a larger divine system, you are just becoming divine.
So is it like becoming a god type of thing? Or
both cases, both the right-hand path and the left-hand path are a path to the Godhead. The difference is that the right-hand path is built on the assumption that you can't have it on your terms. You have to submit to the terms that it's being granted to you on, whereas the left-hand path is that you will take it on your terms.
I see. And is that a Godhead that you can reach during the current lifetime, or is it a...
Well, I mean, there's going to be people who can claim they've already done it, but I don't know how much I believe them.
Like who?
Like it's one of those things where it's always going to come down to theos.
Like who?
It's always going to come down to that when it comes to these topics.
Who considers himself a god in this, I guess, age that we're living in now?
Well, no, a lot of people do. I mean, even like Varg Vikernes, he literally puts out a series of videos explaining how, no, you are a god. Don't worship things outside of yourself. It's like you can honor the gods, but the idea is that humanity is the physical manifestation of the gods on Earth. So the idea that you're supplicating yourself is nonsense. There's honor and then there's supplication.
Okay. Now here's the we're getting deep. We're getting deep. All right. We kind of went off the Mars subject. Garden, I guess we're waiting for you.
Mars?
Your thoughts on Mars. Did we even go to Mars? What's the reason for any type of lying for NASA? I think you're probably more in line with me, actually, which is... Yeah. I think I may have to rethink my position.
Dude, like, we go through waves of agreeing with each other on everything, and then we go through these other waves where, like, 2 or 3 weeks, we're like, fuck you, that's wrong. Fuck you, you're an idiot.
Yeah. Okay, so...
Anyways, about this shit, like, I think chances are that we went to Mars.
Okay.
But in order to investigate it properly, what we would have to do is investigate the Russians and their Mars programs and evaluate those and see if those are true, because is the question whether humanity has reached Mars or not, or just the United States?
Humanity.
I mean, if we believe the Russians did it, then, like, it's believable that we did it.
Okay.
And is it believable that if it was faked, would both sides agree to say, "Oh yeah, we're not disproving that the other side faked it just for like whatever reason," right? If one side was faking it and both weren't, one side would be revealing the other.
Possibly, like, but the value of exploration is in the fact that you can have these huge payoffs from it. And history has proven that time and time again when people move into new lands or they go to the new world and they just find fuckloads of resources that are untouched. And if we had the proper ways to go back and forth and exploit those resources or set up there, whatever, I mean, it makes it, exploration can be worth the cost. So it's not like they're just going up there for nothing.
So what are your thoughts about the photographs? I mean, it just feels fishy. And also, if those things that are in the photographs are indeed things that are fossils, that should be like a huge thing that they would say, hey, look, we found life on Mars. Give us more money. Right?
Well, I don't think that those photos were taken on Earth. Like, okay. I mean, come on. Like I said in the chat, if you're going to have a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy, you're not going to fuck up by taking a picture of a railroad track or get a goddamn rat in the photo.
Yeah, well, you know,
like
the photographer and the editor is probably dead somewhere.
Like, so I don't think that those were taken on, like, I mean, I don't know if they were, who knows? My guess is, like, they weren't taken on Earth. As far as there being a rat on Mars or something, like, that's fucking highly unlikely.
Well, what about
but the microfossils, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who knows, man? That would be something that they would hide. Like, clear evidence of past life on Mars, they would probably keep that a secret for now until they could see if anything could be exploited out of it. And you got to understand the culture of secrecy too. Like, even if you think that, you know, it wouldn't matter if you released it to the public, you still keep it secret because you never know. You never know what might happen in the future. We should have kept that information secret. See, that's that fucking paranoid mindset that some of these people have. That plays a lot into it. There's a lot of, I think, secrets that there's no reason they should be secrets.
Well, I mean, if you think of it on the most fundamental sense, a lot of it's going to be secrets because they want to be the only people to correctly answer the 42 questions when they're dead. That's probably what they're thinking.
Or the secret handshake. They need that secret handshake. Because that's how you get past those pearly gates. Or, sorry.
I think they do fuck with the photos, like they fuck with them to mostly for public relations. They want to make the photos beautiful. They do that with a lot of the Hubble telescope photos, because when the public looks at them, like, and starts paying attention to NASA, their funding tends to go up.
Yeah.
So I wish they'd show us the real photos, the undoctored ones. I think you can see them on some websites. It's not like they didn't release them. It's just that those aren't the photos that are promoted.
Have you seen the photos of what looks like broken machinery on Mars?
No.
Now, just so you guys know, that was the thing I just aired was like 5 years old. So there's a lot that could be different. So
yeah, I've been seeing if you can bring up the photos of broken machinery.
Photos of Mars.
Say they found on Mars.
And there's one that's I don't know what that one is. Let's see. Let's do. You want to use? Oh, duh! I'm not even sharing the screen. All right, photos of Mars. You said photos of Mars broken machine. Is that the one? That doesn't look like broken machinery.
Oh, hold on, I gotta bring back.
Sure.
Oh no, there's one that I saw that looked way more broken machinery. Oh, there, it's over a bit. Oh no, I don't know if your screen's lagged compared to mine.
Out in the desert, there's some very strange things happen to rocks. Like, you'll go up the side of a mountain or something, you'll swear like that someone had carved it out. Or you'll see something like up ahead and it looks like a lizard on a rock, and when you get up to it you realize it is a rock.
Yeah, all right, here we go. Here's something, a video.
I'm sure
that might
some of these are going to be lame, but
yeah,
some of them might look good.
We could speak up when we see something that's lame. So he's getting the actual images from mars.jpl.nasa.gov. I mean, for me, I feel like that could just be stratification.
Yeah, and there's no way to have a sense of scale on here.
There it is.
Yeah, no, I don't know about temple area and stuff. Again, what's the scale?
I don't...
Yeah, I think whoever made this particular video had a little bit too much peyote out in the desert.
Maybe. But that, I mean, that thing does look a little interesting.
It looks like some alien peeking up over a rock or something.
Oh, I see. Man, imagine the amount of time you have to go over all these images from NASA just to see if there's anything that might resemble civilization or life.
But you see that, really, you see that shit all the time. And what I should do is I should get a bunch of the rock photos I took. Because you swear to God, man, that like someone had carved something into the rocks out in the desert. But it's just weathering.
Just, yeah.
Like you see faces and you see like humanoid shapes.
I don't know. I think the lag coming in on Garden's voice is just proof he's posting from Mars and he's just trying to cover it up.
Is there a huge lag?
A little bit. Just not huge, but I was just trying to be stupid.
Now, for me, I think it's something that's square, rectangular, something that has multiple right angles. That's very, very difficult to be naturally occurring.
Weathering will cause cylinders to form in rock.
The right angles?
Like, there's tons of right angles, and like, but there's also cylinders. Like, I won't do it now, but one of these nights I'll get a bunch of the desert photos I've got and
uh-oh. Now we're getting into the pyramids.
Oh boy. I really don't want to hear about alien pyramid stuff. That stuff just bothers me so much. Okay, no, the name of the book is Demonology of King James I.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't the Demonomicon. That was people just referring to it that way, confusing me.
Okay. Well, anyways, I'm gonna see if there's anything extra here.
Oh, that's a pretty big stretch.
I mean, yeah. I feel like if you want to prove something, you want to start with the most pressing argument, right? Where it's this, and here's proof, here's evidence, and then it's like, okay, now where do we go from here? Now, right? I feel like you don't want to start off with just kind of random, hey, this might look like this might look like this.
And the droning music to try to lull you into a sense of disorientation.
I believe it. I believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like he was just drawing some lines in there at the end, like, is this a sink or whatever? It was like angles that he had drawn in there. And that like glowing line or whatever he was using.
But yeah, anyways, I guess I'll end it. You guys know my points. I can agree with Ryan that it's faked because it's easiest. It doesn't matter. I mean, we either have super advanced technology that's hidden from the rest of humanity, and that we only use it for space, not for government institutions or anything else on Earth. But that it's just much cheaper to just fake it, in my opinion, than to build all this stuff and get all these rare minerals or whatever, and to hire all these people to keep alive and make sure that they always lie for them, etc. Or yeah, we did go there, except we're lying about it because they just don't want the public to know anything about the truth. So they only want.
Think about it. I mean, if we find a whole destroyed civilization on Mars, what does that say about their power as our elites? Not much.
What do you mean?
Oh, okay. It's the same reason why for 100 years they've been fighting off this Younger Dryas impact hypothesis theory. If large cataclysmic events play a major role in shaping humanity's destiny, the role of our elite as our so-called shepherds through this difficult existence, as the way they see themselves, you know, they really can't do anything to protect us from that. So what good are they to us?
Exactly.
Like, they can't really do anything to protect us from any of the big problems.
Yeah, these guys have been pretty. I mean, no one thinks the world right now is just awesome. The shape of the world. I mean, if they do, they're really drinking some big Kool-Aid, or they're billionaires or millionaires, you know. Or if you talk to them about problems, they're really shut off from reality. Talking about hunger, all the other people who probably don't even have clean water and things like that. They're like, "What are you talking about? You're crazy. People can go out and get clean water at the store," you know. But yeah, I agree with your point. Plus, you know, if we find a dead civilization on Mars, it's like, why would you hide it from the world? I mean, it's their dead civilization. Obviously that civilization wasn't that great.
But what if it's a dead human civilization? Spooky time.
Oh yeah, I guess that could be really spooky.
I don't know if I would necessarily go for that kind of theory, but I wouldn't insanely deny it's true if they could prove it. But how do you prove it, right?
Sure. Especially if they won't let you in on any to look at the evidence itself. It's like, here's the evidence. There's human civilization on Mars. It's like, all right, let us look at the evidence.
It's like a few weeks ago when Netanyahu brought all those CDs out in a big fancy cabinet, and he says the evidence that Iran is doing this thing is on these CDs I'm showing and pointing my fingers at. It's like, okay, I totally trust you there.
I know, it just kills me. It's like, here's all the evidence and we're showing it to you, but you have no access to it at all, and we're not gonna answer your questions. Next.
As far as these advanced technologies, like, I think that we are using them. Like, we use them in, like, hardened government facilities, and, like, you know, we don't use them in every military base and post office we've got in the country. But some of these advanced technologies, I'm sure, are being used in places like Cheyenne Mountain.
But what about the market? I mean, I feel like it's multi-billion-dollar market for, say, even lithium, the battery technology. Right now it's lithium ion. Next will be like graphene. I mean, that industry is supposed to go from like 4 to 16 billion or more. Like, how do they control the market from
stealing the technology?
Yeah, if we're using the.
Well, in the end, like, if we want to talk just about the way, again, power works, if you control the military, like, you have the power and you can dictate to these companies. I mean, it seems a lot of the time like Boeing and Lockheed are determining U.S. military policy. But it's really the other way around. They facilitate military policy. And we just give them money to do it because, I mean, money is pointless. It's worthless to us. You know, it's worthless to the military-industrial complex. It just prints more of it, and it's kind of an imaginary concept anyway. So you just print all this money, and you get these contractors on the leash. You let them run a little bit wild sometimes so they can make a little bit more money, but ultimately you're in control. And you tell them, this is a top secret technology. And unless you want a fucking bullet in the face, like...
Or we'll just
like,
give this to another defense contractor.
Yeah, they threaten them in one way or another. They could say something like, look, if we catch you releasing secret technologies, you're going to lose contracts.
Contracts or your life.
Yeah, or your life. And there's lots of examples of scientists dying under mysterious circumstances.
Yeah.
You know? It might be worth doing a couple of videos on that.
You are going into some crazy conspiracy theory.
Oh, actually, I want to say something too, just to clarify an earlier point that I made. I might have even made this point the other day. When I say that I think there's advanced technologies that are being suppressed, I don't even necessarily mean they're finished products. So, for example, I don't necessarily think that. So, I believe that anti-gravity technology, not that it's literally anti-gravity, but what achieves that effect.
Yeah.
That exists. And that doesn't mean, though, that I think that the U.S. has some big secret fleet that explains the 17 trillion missing dollars. What I think is more likely is that the technology is being sat on and just not developed to the full extent it could be. So, you know, they might have some devices or craft that utilize those principles, but they probably could be manufacturing 10 or 100 times more, but aren't.
Well, and that's where the free, and this is the legitimate part of the free market argument when you're talking about any type of technology. If you release this technology into the quote free market, into the public, it will develop faster. You know, I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, I'm pretty sure that, you know, I don't know, who knows how much of the black budget went into this and that. Like, I'm sure a lot of it just went into bribing Afghan warlords and shit.
Yeah,
but
I mean, first to market's big in the business world, because once you're first, you know, no one's seen it. You drive the prices because you can put whatever price on it, but then they know that's short-lived because then there's competition. Someone else is gonna find a better version of it, more efficient, or able to mass produce it cheaper, able to sell it cheaper, but more of it. Yeah, I mean, I can see that as a potential. It's like, okay, we've had this out there for like 20 years. Let's.
Well, have any of you guys ever done the experiment? You get like. It uses like not aluminum foil. I think it uses tin foil, coat hangers, and I think you need a car battery. But basically, you can make this little thing. It'll levitate just straight up and down based on the amperage you put into it. And it does something where it's interacting with Earth's electromagnetic field. I remember we did this experiment when I was in grade school.
All right, let's move that into an open topic. Ryan, do you want to host? I'll give you the controls. Come on. All right.
We can call it a night if you're tired, dude.
I can host.
Okay. Awesome.
I can host.
So,
I'm just working on some mental health stuff, so.
Okay. I mean, we'll just talk while it's going on your show.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do a couple of things before we finish up tonight too. So.
Yeah, same here. But yeah, I'll like keep talking and so go and start it whenever. Let me know when it's up, and I'll hand you the controls right now. Making him the host. All right, and I guess that's it. Well, actually, I'll wait. But
yeah, I mean, like, I think we have these secret technologies. I think that, like, we also have to bear in mind that probably some of the technologies that have been created aren't something that you're going to want to release to the public ever. Like some of these biotechnologies or nanotechnologies.
Oh yeah, like if they had a cure for cancer, they're not going to tell people the cure for cancer.
You wouldn't want to release that one, man. There's already too many people, right?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that.
And you can milk fucking money off of them when they're dying.
You just milk money off of it. They don't care about whether people live or die. Heck, people dying is a big industry. Death is a huge industry, just like birth, you know, because that's stuff that's always going to happen. There's always going to be people being born. There's always going to be people dying. So how do you make money off of it? And
the cost of delivering a baby in a hospital is completely out of fucking control.
Yeah. And also, those industries, and if we are in that free market economy, those industries are going to fight it if there's ever this chance of people being able to live forever, right? They just want to if they're going to have to figure it out. It's just like
I'm live, by the way.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So people, I will give you the link to go to Ryan Bannock's live stream, and we will continue.
It's already been updated as well.
Okay. And we will continue our conversation there. So, thank you for joining the show. Did we even go to Mars? Some of us say no, some of us say yes, some of us say yeah, but they're lying to us. All right.
Who knows?
Who knows? All right.
I know.
See you guys.
Because I'm Australian.
And yeah.
Yeah, they filmed.
See you guys
it
on Ryan's
in
channel. Is where I'm at.
Australia.